Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming at you from Film Fanatic headquarters. It's a Saturday around 9:39. Kind of a rainy, overcast day. Good day to watch movies. So, hope everyone's doing good. One thing that's happened that's cool, we've just reached 100 subscribers, so really appreciate it. Thank you to everyone for supporting this channel, and the numbers slowly keep continuing. The numbers are still climbing at a nice slow pace for all of the views. I've had a few more videos that have gotten up into the thousands of views, and there's been more people commenting, and very exciting. So I really appreciate people, supporting this little weird thing that I do. So thanks again. I have more events coming up. We're going to be doing an interview today, and another new interview segment for Film Fanatic. So I'm excited about that with my friend Ray Leona, who's had a lot of experience working in these like super low budget horror films. So we're going to be doing an interview about that today. I'm really excited about that. So stay tuned for that to be posted either later tonight or probably tomorrow. And other events that are happening, just as a quick shout out to everything. We're going to be having our first Film Fanatic live event in a few weeks. Stay tuned for that. That's going to be really exciting. That's going to be a live kind of watch party where we're going to be watching Friday the 13th. One of the Friday the 13th movies, Jason versus Freddy. It's going to be a part of, well, there's two top off kind of celebratory things for that franchise that are coming up, and this is one of them, and there's another one that's going to be coming up, hopefully in a few weeks. But this one is going to be all about the whole, movie Freddy versus Jason, which is an awesome movie. It came out in 2003. I really love it. So we're going to have a live watch party in the flesh, and we're going to have a party at my place and have a few friends over, and it's going to be recorded. So that's coming up in a couple of weeks, so stay tuned for that. And then we have a quantum show coming up in February that I'm really excited about with my great friend Tom Luther, who is an amazing musician, just a pure inspiration to me. He's got this amazing group called Sphere Music. We're going to be doing a double show together at the Poor Farm, and that's also going to be on Friday the 13th. So stay tuned for that. There's going to be, in the next week or two, there'll be a bunch of, I'll start the promotional ball rolling, and so you'll hear and see more things about that. But that's going to be exciting. So yeah, so this show is a little bit of a different thing. I'm trying to do, I'm always trying to brainstorm and think of new ideas, and have a few things where I'm doing, like, I guess you could consider them to be like special shows where they're going to be focused on specific things centered around film, or related to that universe. I did a show where all I talked about was movie soundtracks and composers that I really love, and that there's a big pool of films, movie scores, soundtracks, and also composers that I kind of always go back to as a source of inspiration. And I'm always checking out, whenever I check out new films, I obviously always check out the soundtracks, and if I'm really into that, I usually take a dive into that. So I did a show last week where I just covered soundtrack oriented kind of things, and that was really, really cool. That was a fun kind of culmination of presenting an aspect of the films that I really love. In some ways, it's almost my favorite part of the whole universe, or the whole aesthetic around films. And that's always, like I've said many times, that's the biggest kind of component that acts as an influence for quantum. So we did that show. I did that show last week, and that had it's getting close to over 1,000 views right now. So that's been really cool that people have been checking that out. So yeah, so this show is a little bit different. This is going to be really about kind of just popped in my head the last 24 hours. It's going to be more or less about film critics, the backlash that certain films get, films that come out that initially are commercial or looked at as, say, commercial failures or commercial bombs. And then over time, things kind of come back around, and some films, and also the idea of like how that happens to a lot of films initially when they're launched out into the world. But then as time goes by, people start wanting to see it again, and then people's opinions change, and there's this whole collective swing to where it's they regard the film or the art as something that is really good, or they have a newfound respect for it. So yeah, I've noticed that more and more. So it was something. There's an idea that I just came up with, and it was something I really wanted to kind of talk about. It's mostly centered. The main reason that this came up is centered on. It's mostly centered on Halloween Ends, the movie David Allen Green just released this or last month, and it was the conclusion to his trilogy for the Halloween franchise. And supposedly it was going to be the final movie in the franchise, which I don't think it will be. It will definitely be the last appearance by Jamie Lee Curtis in the franchise. I think because that was part of the clause in the contract for her career. But other than that, it's hard to believe or to say that there there won't be any other films. I think in some ways the last film opened it up to where I'm more interested actually in seeing if they could do some more things and do some more things that are a little bit more outside of the tradition of a Hollywood horror franchise. Like I feel like for the most part they definitely tried, but for the most part accomplished with Halloween Ends, where they really didn't stick with convention anymore and the usual horror tropes that you see, especially when it's pertaining to a really really popular franchise. They legitimately took a risk. So one of the analogies I hear it being compared to a couple examples of films that came out many years ago, but they were really lambasted by critics, and there was no audience for the films. They didn't make any money. They were looked at as commercial flops and failures. Two examples would be Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, and another one that was a huge financial loss was John Carpenter's The Thing. And I just was, reading about that on how, and it's something I've always thought, but how now both of those films, Stanley Kubrick's The Shining and John Carpenter's The Thing, are now regarded as like basically legendary films, iconic films, and anyone who, any critic or party on YouTube who has a YouTube channel and it's horror oriented, those films without a doubt always make those lists, and sometimes they are at the top of the list and even the number one films in a lot of these lists. And it's an interesting parallel sometimes because of how that happens, with like the initial reaction from the public and also critics. One of a slightly different take on it or look at it, looking at, I try to tie in music with those kinds of aspects, but one band I can think of that went through that is the Velvet Underground. They were, one of the most, well, I'd say arguably probably the most influential band on, every, indie rock band on the face of the planet. But initially when their first album came out, it was completely torn apart by critics in every way, shape, or form, and it never sold anything. And their record didn't sell. It was it was pretty much at zero, and they were kind of despised and hated. And years later, they're regarded as what they did. The path that they led was things of legend, and now it's you know part of rock and roll DNA forever. And they're looked at as this iconic band. And with The Shining, the same thing. Like The Shining and also The Thing are movies that I've always loved. I've always thought they're just amazing classics. Like overall, I did a show about a month ago where I just talked about Stanley Kubrick. And Stanley Kubrick's my favorite director overall. I love so many of his films, and the one that I always go back to, the one I would have to say is probably my favorite, is The Shining. I have like multiple copies of that on DVD and also Blu-ray. And that was a movie I've just seen so many times that I can't even count. And also, I'm a huge John Carpenter fan, and I love so many of his films. And I think for me, out of all of his work, The Thing is probably my favorite of his like amazing catalog of films. And especially, where you're talking about in camera horror effects and just the level of creativity that was put into that movie, just in that aspect alone, just groundbreaking. And it's an interesting parallel because when Halloween Ends came out, and David Alan Green said like this would be the last movie of the trilogy. It was released through Blumhouse Studios, which is which was created by Jason Blumhouse, who has basically he started this big film kind of production company about maybe 10 or 12 years ago. And one of the first movies that he had launched that was a huge success was Jordan Peele's Get Out. That movie was kind of a phenomenon, and that movie really, I think arguably that's one of the most creative and original pieces of horror that's come out in the last 20 years. It's a completely original film. I remember hearing a friend refer to it as kind of this zeitgeist, like a culmination of all of these other things and influences, and also tying in some social political ideas of kind of where we're at as a society. So the film kind of took on to a degree a little bit of a deeper and heavier message, aside from it being just an incredible horror movie. But that I looked at, and he my friend Sean Russell, who I did an interview with last or quite a few months ago, he kind of looked at it as like this culmination, like almost like a zeitgeist of a new form, a completely new view of and a new vision and new scope of what horror can be, and to a degree what it should be. So Blumhouse had released that, and that was a huge commercial hit. And since then, that put that company on the map. And since then, they've released all kinds of other movies. One of their other big franchises, and I actually really love it a lot, and I'm going to eventually do a show on, is the Purge franchise, which is I think one of the best. I kind of, for my money, I kind of feel as far as more fran- horror franchises that are contemporary, more modern oriented franchises. I feel like, for my own personal taste, The Purge, that's my favorite franchise. I just think it's great. I think it's a rare thing. I think each movie actually kind of gets better than its predecessor. And it's always original. It's always kind of paying homage to the previous movie and then also the kind of the universe, but it always gives you something new, and the bar gets raised each time. So Blumhouse has done some really great things, but they also, they've had some clunkers. I think it's a big studio, and they've released lots of movies, lots of content over the last couple of years. The other one that I really, really loved that they had put out was the Invisible Man remake. That's another show I really, really want to do. I think that's a phenomenal movie. That was when I really kind of had taken some time and checked out the studio Blumhouse, like the products of what they're doing, the kind of the vision behind that company and what Jason Blumhouse kind of set out. That really, augmented that to me or highlighted that to me for me because I really love that movie. So I'll eventually do a show on that. And the franchise of Halloween was basically, you know, kind of more or less to a degree reinvented. Bloomhouse had announced it was about probably 3 or 4 years ago of this new Halloween trilogy. And it was going to be directed by this new person, a new guy, David Allen Green, who had never really had too much film directing experience. He came out of doing lots of music videos, but he also did like comedies. I think one he did a movie with Seth Rogen, Pineapple Express. Didn't he didn't really have a background in horror, so but he was hired to do these three new movies based that came out about 4 years ago. Halloween, which came out in 2000, I believe 18, which was kind of to a degree a continuation of the saga, which in the storyline took place right after John Carpenter's 1978 classic, and it basically didn't really tie in anything else. There were references and there were things taken from Halloween 3, the season of the witch, which is for me it might be my favorite film aside from the original in the series because I just love how utterly original and how bonkers that movie is. So after Halloween, Halloween Kills came out, and then Halloween Ends just came out this year. Not a huge fan of those films. I think there's some things about those films that I like. I think they definitely at times strive to do something new and original, but I don't think that they really followed through with a lot of the ideas. I don't really. I feel that it might have suffered from too many cooks in the kitchen, too many people having suffered from there was too much input from other people, and I kind of feel it shows, in the script and the film, and it also lacks the magic of where you feel like you're in Halloween at times. Halloween Kills, I think there were some improvements. There's some things about that film I really like, and again, it's just a matter of opinion. But they were trying to go in different directions, but it just wasn't quite there, and they were, you know, but I think they put out some really interesting ideas. They presented some new original ideas that I thought were really cool. And Halloween Ends, that, I saw that in the theater and I was really surprised by that film. I think some ways it was a little bit disappointing, but I think overall I really kind of enjoyed that film. I'm looking forward to watching it. I thought it very much reminded me, even though it's a very different film, but there were things about it where, as far as the creative, taking a creative license, and taking some risks and trying to do something different. There were a lot of parallels between that and Halloween 3 Season of the Witch. And I felt they really did try something new, and for the most part, I think they did, and they were pretty successful. I was really, really surprised. I remember seeing it in the theater, and I remember sitting in the theater, and I was really curious as to I there was a level where it wasn't predictable, and I was like, where is this going to go? About 20 minutes, half hour into it, I was like, where is this film going to go? And I was always kind of surprised the direction that the film went in, and I thought just that alone was kind of commendable that it had, it was definitely a Halloween movie, but I felt that it took some chances and risks, and it didn't really rely on the same old kind of structure and format that we've seen, 1,000 times. But anyway, so the show is about, basically trends and how certain films come out, and aside from Halloween Ends was a financially it had a big release the first couple of days, and then it was destroyed by critics and fans alike, and it suffered, and was looked it's now looked at as a commercial flop because the other previous movies, were massive. They made massive amounts of money. Aside from the Rob Zombie movies, I think that they were easily the biggest films commercially to have success in the entire franchise. But I noticed when the film came out, there were all of these, and it's different now, obviously, with social media. But I noticed at first there were a few people that had seen it and they were posting about it, how they thought it was essentially a piece of garbage, and that were almost just complaining, and there was and then I noticed there was a few people, and then it just was like this tidal wave, and then suddenly there was whole groups, like hundreds and thousands of people on social media, just left and right trashing the movie, not even doing it in like an intelligent way, but just really trashing it to a degree of where they kind of came across as just morons, and they were just trashing it, and it became this like weird collective thing. There's plenty of things I don't like, and there's plenty of things I do love, and I know I try to carry when if I talk about those things, I try to be somewhat respectful, but not come across as like a meathead or a bully about it, and not try and I don't use that negativity to for my own gain. I don't put out negative videos or negative reviews with the intention of, well, it's going to be people are going to click on it because they see somebody who's really pissed off about a movie, and I'm going to use that to further my agenda for my channel. That seems to be the channel the trend as far as negativity and negative reviews. It's kind of like this. Everybody drives by a car accident and they want to see what the hell's going on, even though it's a terrible thing. Their curiosity is piqued, so they want to click on it. And I feel like that's this weird collective thing that people have. But I noticed, so there was this big giant tidal wave of how negative this film was, and just like and people were just saying, one thing, obviously it's one thing if you don't like the film, but people were just like being just outlandish about what they were saying, and it was just like, okay, come on, like, are you taking it? And at the end of the day, it's a film. It's a work of fiction, and I was kind of like, at the end of the day, it's a movie. I mean, it's entertainment. Are you taking it that seriously that it's like ruining your day and ruining your week? Like, it was just kind of ridiculous. It was overkill. But I noticed it became this like weird collective, and everyone, people that I knew and people I didn't know, but people mostly through what I watched on social media. First, it started with the critics with the negative reviews, and then it carried over to social media, and then also like YouTube and various other things where like collectively there was this like horrendous backlash where people were like so angry that they were like coming to fisticuffs about it. And it got to the point where when I thought maybe it was BS or like some kind of fake story or some kind of fake thing or fake news. But it got to the point where there was an actual. I read about this one story where fans that were completely worked up and pissed off over Halloween Ends, that they were actually. They, they put together this petition to raise money and to try to get the film re-edited or reshot or basically be redone because it didn't fit their needs. That happened during this whole firestorm of negativity around the film. And and my first reaction was like, you got to be kidding me. Is this a real thing? So I looked into it, and it was an actual thing that happened. There were like quite a few fans, thousands, maybe even a million people that were involved with starting this petition, trying to raise money. And it was just completely out of control. But the thing is, it's like if people like something, they like what they like. If they don't like something, they might come back around to it, or they just, it's their opinion, and that's fine. I don't want to live in a world where everybody has the same opinion. That would be boring. But it's the way people carry themselves is the thing that I struggle with, and that I find is really tough. And I feel like it's a thing of where it becomes a collective. I feel it's that car accident scenario. I feel when I saw the wave just kind of get bigger and bigger around this whole thing, around the negative feedback and backlash around Halloween ends, I just saw everybody and their grandmother jumping on this thing, and I felt like it's not even a thing of where maybe some of these people didn't even see the movie. It's because they want to be known because everyone else is doing it, and everybody else seems to have this viewer spin on the movie, and it's getting all of this traction and millions of views, and it starts these horrendously bad conversations, and it just keeps adding and adding this fuel to this fire. I feel like there's probably a lot of people involved with that whole scenario where they probably didn't even see the movie. They want to be part of their little group that is trashing this movie, and they want to be cool. They want to fit in, and I kind of feel like it went to that point. It was elevated to such a height that it was like this collective kind of frenzy, and that's a thing around us as a species is we're social creatures, we're herd creatures, we like to do things, we have a pack mentality, and I feel like when there's a statement or some degree to some movement or some reactionary cause, and it kind of lands or makes a mark with certain people, and it causes this ripple, people will want to gravitate towards that to become part of that and to feel that they're included to a degree. And I think even their own, and I think it can be people that are not even really aware of how they actually feel about something. It's more of just that that action of what else can I add to this pile of crap, or well, everybody else is agreeing with this, so I should just do it too. And it's more of a comfort. It's like comfort food and that was what I felt because of the level that the film had got at, or the reviews, the feedback like on Facebook by friends and just these collective groups. And I noticed also like it's a weird thing about social media. It was also people that like groups that I know on Facebook. These were also people who tend to do this kind of thing all the time anyway, whether it's music or some other film. They do this collective thing, and they can make up their own. Hopefully, they can make up their own minds as to whether if they like something or be critical of something. But I think it's more of a social thing of where they want to hang with the cool kids, and it's not really about their opinion anymore. So it's a weird collective thing that happens with people, and I see that with social media. And I remember one of my responses, and I don't ever usually respond to like real negative things that are on say for instance for Facebook. But one of the things I posted was, and I didn't even really say that I liked the movie. I said I had just seen it, and I said something in regards to saying I wouldn't be surprised, say within 5 to 10 years, that Halloween Ends eventually finds a core audience that actually really loves or appreciates the film, and it could be, it could, and I said to it, it's I think it's following the same trajectory as Season of the Witch, Halloween 3, and I to this day I think that's exactly what's happening, because that film was a commercial dud. It was so unconventional. It was not a commercial film. The filmmakers, John Carpenter, Deborah Hill, the producer, they decided to, just throw a little bit of caution on the wind. They took a risk. It's tied to the mythology of Michael Myers and the Halloween to a degree, but not really. But they took a creative risk, and they really did something completely outside of the norm. Something totally, out of the kind of conservative context that happens as far as what people always want to see or hear. they totally threw caution to the wind, and that film was completely destroyed by people and critics alike. And now that film is regarded as one of the greatest kind of cult classic exploitation horror films. And for me, that film is that. Like, I love that film to death. I've always loved that film. I remember seeing that as a kid, but I remember that no everybody hated that film, and over the last few years, I've noticed, it's been reissued, re-released multiple times on Blu-ray and 4K and DVD. There's collector's editions of it now, and now it's looked at as a classic for people who are into the kind of the B movie horror exploitation world. And it found an audience. Like, it actually made money. It's actually come into its own. It's its own movie. It's not. It's part of the franchise, but it's its own movie. And I had basically said I would not be surprised if that happens with Halloween Ends, say in 5 to 10 years. I feel like there's a lot of parallels between those two movies. Um, and I responded in this in this giant thread that was on Facebook where people were just, it was probably like 80 to 100 people that were just trashing it and just, basically using words like, oh, it's a piece of shit, or it's a piece of garbage, and, I want my money back. They killed this franchise. And it just went on and on and on. And I posted this thing, not even stating my opinion. I wouldn't be surprised if this film in a few years is finds an audience and eventually maybe makes some money and might take on this cult like status. And since then, I've seen, and this Halloween Ends has been out for about a month or so now. And since then, I've noticed this big swing, and it's been really interesting and weird. I've noticed this new kind of shift in a lot of ways. And it's interesting because so now I notice that there's this whole other trend with people on YouTube and even people on social media where people are saying, wow, like, this film was actually interesting. They might not necessarily like it, but they give it this new praise of, like, they definitely feel that David Allen Green tried to take the franchise in a different direction, and to a degree was pretty successful with doing something unconventional. So the whole, like, kind of conversation or the scope of of the look of this film, or the feedback of this film, has definitely changed, just within a matter of a few weeks. And it's funny because I realize that's now this new thing that I'm seeing on YouTube where there's been articles being put out by Variety. There was an article, I think it was in Variety, about this very same thing, kind of what I was saying about this film could be regarded as, it's following the same trajectory as, Season of the Witch and other films in the horror genre that were commercial failures. Like I mentioned, The Thing and The Shining, where initially they were failures, but years time goes by and it finds this audience, and they get over a period of time, these films are regarded as incredibly pivotal, and they become these almost iconic films. I wouldn't say Halloween Ends is going to be, up there with like The Thing in say 10 years, but the method behind it, I think, is commendable. But so it's really interesting and wild that's happening already, and the shift. And the main part of this whole talk, or this little discussion, is really about people's the general populace, where they can't seem, they get caught up in this fever. And again, like I talk about the driving past a car accident, that kind of scenario. It seems like people have less of an easier time just making up their own minds and being able to just state their opinions. And and the other thing is maybe try doing it to a degree, in a respectful light, instead of talking about it in terms if you were like a 12-year-old kid, which is the thing that happens constantly, and that's used to like, that's more gasoline. And it's a thing. It's a social thing. I think the bigger picture of it is it doesn't seem people are so consumed by the idea of like they kind of want to fit in, and I feel like they can't make up their own minds about a lot of things. So it really changes the scope, the overall scope as to how something's being presented. Same thing has happened in one way too with, say, Terrifier 2. I'm not a really big fan of those movies, and those movies are so incredibly hyped. I haven't seen Terrifier 2. I have seen the first one, and I'm not a very big fan of that film, and I've done discussions about that. But I feel like that's another example of that, where people, everybody and their grandmother, is just saying, how an incredible film it is, and it's kind of gone the other way. But I feel, again, it's that thing of where it's more of a collective. It's because people want to, it gets to the point where it gets to this fever pitch, and it's not really about the film anymore. It's more about this kind of social acceptance and getting that, those accolades from your friends because, yeah, I agree with you, and yeah, that movie was a piece of garbage, or or that was the best movie ever. There's no, like, I feel like there's no middle ground in social media where people can just make up their own opinions and have a fair and balanced and rational discussion on it, and not think about whether or not they're the friends that they have on Facebook, or the people that are following them, or people that they are following, have your same opinion. And well, that's cool if we can all do this together. And it's such a weird thing, and that's different. I mean, with obviously with the parallels between, say, The Shining and Season of the Witch and John Carpenter's The Thing, social media was not a thing. I mean, but it was still kind of the same reaction. Social media, I think, I feel like it has some really wonderful attributes, and is really great. I think there's probably more positive, at least in my view, the application of what social media can do. I feel like there's more good than bad, I think, to where that can be used for helping artists, and the exchange of ideas, breaking down certain barriers. It's easier for styles where there's like a cross-pollination now. There's less borders. It's easier to get exposed to lots of new things. But that also has a lot of negative aspects. And I feel like with how social media is now, with people voicing their opinions and using it as a diary to a degree, but then everybody and their grandmother feels like they are a worthy critic to trash something, even though they don't really know, they don't know quite how to articulate it. They don't really know what they're talking about because they haven't spent enough time talking about on the things that they're talking about, like researching or checking out things in those particular genres. So everybody has a microphone, and it's that is very different now, and I feel like that's a really negative thing, and that's really changed. And again, you can't stop that, but that's where things and again, this is just my own opinion, and my opinion is up my butt, but that's where I feel. That's how I feel things are very different that way, and it adds to this kind of firestorm of whether something is praised or hated, and there's not like anybody in the middle ground that can just like something or not, and if they don't like something, they can just be pretty rational and respectful, and be able to give a relatively intelligent argument or case for why they feel that the way they do, and not be caught up in all of the mudslinging and the trash talking, because that's kind of our culture now, and it's really negative. But that being said, I do feel that Halloween Ends is following the same trajectory of those films, especially Season of the Witch. So today was just a show I really wanted to kind of talk about that, you know, how culturally things are very different, and the idea of like people's views and their opinions, whether, and they tend to be either something where they either love the thing to death, or they just absolutely hate it. There's no middle ground, and I think that's all attributed to this kind of pack mentality and this collectiveness that happens, and people can't really seem to make up their own minds and not worry about what their friends think. So this is Jason Dean, and so thanks again. Really appreciate the support. So we'll see you next time for my next movie review, and also for the upcoming interview segment that I'll be having with Ray Leone. So if you like this page, please like and subscribe to it, and we will see you next time. Peace.